In the world of Dead by Daylight, something's always changing. Nothing stays the same for long, whether it's new perks or killers changing how people play, balance changes that can see characters or perks modified beyond recognition, or a mid-chapter survivor release filling the game with an absurd amount of bugs. DBD changes constantly, and players both old and new can struggle to keep up. This constant state of flux is a core part of the live service game model. New content keeps people coming back because the game experience continues to feel fresh. There's always something new to try, something you can come back to. But in this hectic frenzy of changes and characters, I've been noticing a trend over the past year or so that has started to gain a little more traction in the mainstream DBD conversation. Has anyone else noticed that Survivor is really strong right now? I'm being rhetorical, of course. It's not exactly an unheard of opinion that Dead by Daylight favours the Survivor side. It's an opinion that you'll hear all the time, regardless of the actual game state. We've been through periods where DBD has obviously and overwhelmingly favoured one of the two roles before. And that's not been enough to stop players of those favoured roles insisting that they're the oppressed ones because they got spun or missed a flashlight save one too many times. But there's something interesting about the current period in DBD history that I think merits scrutiny. From my recent experience, Survivor as a role has been very strong for quite some time, but that hasn't tended to translate into a better experience for many Survivor players. Historically, when Survivor has been very strong, it's been obvious. The same perks every game, often 3 or 4 to a team, to the point that every match felt like you were playing against a pile of dead hard, circles of healing or decisive strikes, strapped to a character model and told to pop 5 gens. The strength of a Survivor in 2025 is more subtle. It's snuck up on us in ways that it never has before, and it's left a good portion of Survivor players behind. That's what I'll be taking a look at in today's video. Trying to take a more measured look at an argument as old as the game itself, picking apart what makes Survivor in the current era so strong, but also trying to understand where people might not feel that strength, and what that says about the balance and perception of balance in Dead by Daylight. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to the secret meta shift that nobody noticed for months. Before we dig into what the secret meta actually is, or how it stayed secret for so long, let's start with the core principle behind everything this video is saying. Survivor is very strong at the moment. If this isn't true, then the entire video's premise falls apart on a base level. So let me start by asking an important question. When did DBD start getting Survivor-sided again? Obviously, in the olden days, DBD was very Survivor-sided and remained that way for years until SIP 1.0 dropped, alongside a slew of powerful regression perks, and DBD became truly killer-sided for the first time ever. This was the age of Chess Merchant, of the Call of Brine Eruption Jane Kick meta, and Pain Res DMS at full strength. When Circle of Healing was nerfed, there was a short time where Killer was unquestionably top dog. But behaviour was swift to act, and with nerfs to Call of Brine, Pain Resonance and Eruption, the game entered the most balanced state it's ever been in. Sure, we've had some outlier perks like Made for This for a few months and Thrill of the Hunt for about a week, but importantly, both sides had access to these outliers at different moments. Everybody had a little bit of bullshit for a short period as a treat until it got nerfed. But starting around or just after the 8th anniversary, I started to notice a worrying trend where regardless of the balance of individual perks, the base game was starting to twist in favour of survivors and killers were struggling to keep up. Nothing I think showcases this quite on the level of 70-second hook stages. It was an innocuous enough change, slipped in on the Castlevania chapter patch like it was the most normal thing in the world, but it completely upended time efficiency for everybody in every match of DBD. Now a prospective unhooker has 10 free seconds to spend on generators, to get in that reset before they need to go up for the unhook, 20 extra seconds per survivor of guaranteed safety on the hook, and smart survivors will wait to the end of the stage to get the pull and they'll make you feel those extra seconds. We took a game where time efficiency is the most important thing and gave the Survivor team an extra 80 seconds to work with. That's almost a whole extra gen of time they just got for free without any acknowledgement of how powerful this was and without any compensation for the other side. In the developer update that came with the chapter, the devs said that this was meant as compensation for the extra 10 seconds that generators took to complete after 6.1.0, which is an explanation that doesn't really fly with me, but we'll get into that later when we talk about perks. 70-second stages are, in my opinion, the biggest base game changes that pushed this game in favour of the survivors, but it wasn't the only one. The Mangled nerf I don't think gets talked about enough. For those who don't know, Mangled used to apply its heal speed debuff indefinitely from when you were hit and was only removed when you became healthy. But in March last year, Mangled got changed so that it lasts for a fixed amount of time after the hit is applied, and wears off after that, which instantly made most sources of Mangle completely useless, because now if a killer hits and runs, you can just sit on gens while you wait it out, and your time efficiency isn't affected at all. This is so much worse when you realise the Mangled timer doesn't pause when you're on the ground or on the hook, meaning that by the time you're unhooked and able to be healed, there's a good chance that the Mangled from the hit that downed you has already worn off. The change obviously cripples Sloppy Butcher, which was a commonly used killer perk before the change, but sees almost no play now. But suddenly every killer who has a Mangled add-on suddenly has a useless add-on slot now. Destiny got it worse than anybody. The poor guy had 2 Mangled add-ons that just became cosmetic add-on slots after this change, on a killer who already had some of the worst add-ons in Dead by Daylight. This change was done to open up design space for future anti-healing perks without risking it stacking with Mangled, but we're over a year on now and there's been no sign of that design space being used. Is the anti-healing in the room with us? The closest that we've ever come to new design space being explored since then is No Quarter, which is one of the worst perks in the entire game. And yes, before anyone says anything, I know Leverage also got reworked recently, and it's definitely more useful now than it was before, but it's got so many terms and conditions attached to it that it's proven very hard to slot into builds. First of all, attaching anti-healing to hook actions gets awkward when the killers who inarguably need anti-healing the most are slugging killers like Twins or hit-and-run killers like Wraith, neither of which are going to be hooking you as much as other killers and will be less able to proc Leverage in the course of regular gameplay. It also means Leverage eat shit to anti-tunnel perks because they give the survivors effectively an extra health state off the hook that will protect them anyway until Leverage wears off, and it eats shit to Resurgence too, one of the most common healing perks in the game these days. And this is all for a perk that's ultimately just reverse Will Make It, with a third of the duration of Will Make It, and without the stackability that Will Make It has with other healing steroids like medkits, or just a teammate. The only way you can stack Leverage up to beat Survivor reset perks is if you run it with Gift of Pain to counter Resurgence and further slow immediate resets down with Mangled right off the hook. But now you're dedicating half your build to anti-healing that still isn't going to work in hit and run or slugging situations, that still eat shit to anti-tunnel perks, and auto resets like Second Wind and Plot Twist. And in the worst case scenario, the Leverage debuff is only 30 seconds. You can still wait it out easily. May I remind you, by the way, that this has come alongside a dozen buffs in the past 2 years to healing or medkit perks, introduction of new healing perks in Do No Harm and Strength in Shadows, and the nerf to Franklin's that prevents it from draining medkit charges. Opening new design space, indeed. I'll talk more about the perk imbalance between Survivor and Killer later, but the other base kit mechanic that has kind of skewed the balance of power between Killer and Survivor is one that I might get some flack for talking about here. The base kit anti-camp feature and self-unhook. Unlike longer hook stages and the Mangled nerf, I very much believe that the base kit anti-camp has significantly improved the game at a baseline level. Aside from in the endgame, true blue proper Bubba style face camping is a thing of the past, and that's great. A huge net positive for DBD, especially for newer or less coordinated survivors. But the system is not perfect, especially when it comes to late game situations where the killer is forced to defend gens in a specific area. If you have a tight gen spread in the late game, which is just a smart thing to do, and is the only way a lot of weaker or less mobile killers can turn a game around, then the anti-camp can punish players for getting a hook inside that tight gen spread, and prevent them from punishing the mistake of going down in the worst place it is possible to go down. This is a problem that disproportionately affects weaker or less mobile killers. A speedy killer like Kaneki or Blight can go back to the area of the hook whenever they like, something the average Kaneki or Blight player will remind you of at every opportunity, meaning they can defend the hook from further away. Plus they're just stronger than the M1 killers of the world and are thus less likely to have to force a late game situation in the first place. For what it's worth, the system can kind of suck for Survivor as well. The fact that you can't see your teammate's progress bar makes zero sense and is a feature we've been asking for since the anti-camp got implemented. The feature just needs a second look over, I think. Maybe the way to do it is to have how fast the anti-camp builds scale with how many gens are done. So if you get camped at 4 or 5 gens left, that anti-camp builds faster than it does currently, because the killer should be taking chases in this time. But if you're down to just 1 or 2 gens, the anti-camp builds slower, to not punish killers for making the correct decision at the period of the game where there's the least margin for error. Make this change and show people the progress bar on the HUD where the deep wound bar goes, and I think the anti-camp would be perfect. But as it stands, the system is definitely flawed and can screw over weaker or less mobile killers later in the game when those killers need to be able to make a turnaround. These 3 features were all significant buffs to the Survivor role that didn't really get accounted for over the past couple of years. 70-second stages especially were a huge power swing in favour of survivors that just didn't get accommodated at all. Of course, this kind of stuff is just the tip of the iceberg. There's definitely a lot more behind the incremental increase in survivor power level, but these base kit changes really can't be ignored. But ignored they were. A 10-second increase in stages, or every mangled killer losing an add-on, isn't sexy. It's not something that players will immediately see in action or have a noticeable impact on every game they play, so it's the kind of thing players will easily gloss over, especially because other big shifts were happening at the same time that impacted players a lot more viscerally and maintained the illusion that Killer was doing well. New killers, and their effects on queue times. Between each round of 2v8 making killer queues for both modes slower than Continental Drift, and the releases of Kaneki and Springtrap jacking up killer queues in most of the past few months regardless of 2v8, it became clear that DBD matches desperately needed more survivor players. This has come alongside a spree of very strong killers who saw, and in Kaneki's case still see, a hell of a lot of play. And even Vecna has a very high kill rate despite not being as strong or popular to play as those two. With most of the past year's new releases, the presence of strong killers has been so high that the average survivor match probably can be more challenging. Survivors feel hard done by because they get 10 Kanekis in a row and they die a lot against him, not realising that Kaneki is an outlier in terms of strength and ease of use. The average killer is not Kaneki or Dracula. They're not these new high A-tier monstrosities that Behaviour pushed out throughout last year, and there's no better exhibition of that than Springtrap, a mediocre new release who nevertheless saw a huge amount of play. There is a reason that more people started complaining about how hard Killer is just after Springtrap dropped, because Springtrap exhibited just how powerful a killer needs to be to keep up with the efficiency of modern survivor play. And then the anniversary dropped, which was killer-sided again and continued to make it unfashionable to talk about how bad Killer actually felt in a normal setting. There is a reason that outside the anniversary modifier, killer queues were actually pretty normal in the main game mode. It's only now that we've gotten a B-tier killer outside the anniversary event that killer queues have gone back to normal across the board, and only now that people have started to realise that the average killer game is becoming harder than they remember, because these strong new killers and killer-sided event were acting as a smokescreen to distract players from the gradual power creep of Survivor and how the average killer just can't keep up anymore. The reasonable thing to do, as you'd think, would be to buff these killers up to keep up with the changing pace, and to their credit, Behaviour has been trying to do this. In the last year or two, we've seen buffs to Knight, Freddy, Singularity, Clown, Vecna, Legion, Huntress, and even stronger killers like Pyramid Head, designed to keep them up to date. But these largely haven't done the job of keeping these killers viable in an increasingly hostile environment, and the big reason for that is how they chose to buff them. Most of the time when Behaviour winds up buffing killers these days, they don't tend to increase their effectiveness ceiling by letting them do things they couldn't do before. Instead, they raise the effectiveness floor by making the killer easier to get value from at a baseline level. There's no better example of this in the recent Clown changes. Clown recently got a bunch of changes to make his haste bottles more appealing to use, and the way that some people are going on about Clown after his live release, you'd think he was some A to S tier monstrosity destroying lobbies left and right. He definitely feels worse to play against as Survivor, that much is beyond question, but that doesn't mean he's meaningfully stronger than he was before. All of the weaknesses that he had before, like pre-dropping pallets and pre-running before he gets to you, he still has all those weaknesses. Those were the bottlenecks with his power design, and that's why Survivor players who are halfway intelligent will keep kicking Clown's ass just the same way they did before. Aranad, that guy who wrote the 200-page Clown guide, agrees with me on this front. The killer is about as strong as he was before, but using yellows effectively got made significantly easier.
What tier would you place Clown in relative to other killers? I would say he's in the exact same tier that he initially was. Previously, I put him bottom of C. Right now, I would put him maybe middle of C. And the only reason he's even there to begin with is simply because of the prevalence, in my opinion, of dead zone hits at the more casual, lower mid MMR spectrum. When you look at higher MMRs, it just doesn't matter. You might get some hits that otherwise, right, wouldn't have been possible pre-PTB at higher MMRs because of the yellow giving you the strength in the dead zone, which is where I kind of translate that slight stronger, placement on the tier list. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he's still similar pre-PTB. He's still countered by pre-running. He's still countered by sitting on generators. He's still countered by waiting out the majority of your hook timers before your unhooks. He's still countered by going down under a pallet. He's still countered by dying in a corner. He's still countered by body blocking when he's tunneling and he otherwise really, really needs to commit. And now because of that, he has to hit the body block and he can't follow up afterward.
The difference of opinion that I have here with Aranad is that he seems to believe it's a good thing. He's happy that more people will want to engage with Clown's yellow bottle mechanics and stick with the killer, and he's perfectly within his rights to believe that, especially because it doesn't really affect the way that he plays the killer.
Do you think these changes are better for Clown and the game as a whole? Honestly, yes, I do. Personally, pre-PTB, what I liked the most about playing Clown was the artistic finesse of orchestrating double bottle combos. It was nice knowing that I was able to do something that was harder and that people kind of looked up to me for that. But at the end of the day, the satisfaction that I got from playing Clown was not people looking up to me for the, setting up the bottles, right? Getting these hits. What I enjoyed about playing Clown was the setups themselves. Being able to put a yellow bottle and a pink bottle on a pre-drop pallet, engineering that hit before they make it back to the pallet. That was what I liked. It wasn't the fact that it was difficult. So as long as that is possible, right? And it's possible as a result of making the yellow bottles easier to use for Clown players at a casual level, I do think that is good for the game. Because when you, again, look at how many of the people that play DBD are very casual, right? Having really complex mechanics for a killer's kit, right? It makes it harder for people to feel like that is a killer they're going to want to play. It's why I think a lot of Clown players only use pinks, or they just played Clown and then dropped him afterward. They didn't really find him fun to play. And that is why I think it's good for the game. We make the killer less complicated. We don't necessarily alter his playstyle, right? That was the issue, again, compared to pre-PTB. That was the issue compared to the PTB, is the PTB did alter the playstyle because you would only have the dead zone hits. You would not have the pre-dropped hits. If the dead zone hits come alongside the pre-drop hits with this patch, then that, in essence, that's why I think it's still good for the game.
But I have a different perspective. I like when a killer has a steep learning curve. I like when a killer is hard to get into when they have a high skill ceiling, because it encourages that killer's player base to learn those mechanics, to get better and put the effort in to play their killer well if they want results. Why do you think I made 2-hour-long guides to Skull Merchant? I want to encourage people to play killer well, to reach a killer's skill ceiling and challenge themselves, to make games more fun for everyone. Watching Aranad play Clown on stream is like watching a master at work. It's really fantastic to see somebody playing this killer at this level, and I think more people should be encouraged to do this, to put in that time to play like he does, which is why lowering the skill floor of yellow bottles irks me so much, because if players are still able to get decent results without putting that level of work and learning in, why would they ever bother to put that level of work and learning in? You could put in 100% effort to learn Clown like Aranad did, and do pretty well with this fairly weak killer. Or you could put in a quarter of that, 25%, and do decently by just spamming yellows over and over again with Subway Surfers playing on your other monitor. And the recent spree of Clown changes helped the guy playing at 25% way more than the guy playing at 100%. This has been a trend among recent killer changes. Huntress going to 7 hatchets was great for bad Huntress players because it meant they can miss more, but good Huntresses barely even notice it. Vecna's cooldowns getting shorter rather than the spells getting buffed to be more effective when used makes them more spammable and forgiving of mistakes, especially when it comes to fly, when the bottleneck that Vecna's strength has at high levels of play is just how inconsistent his spells are. Singularity went from one of the more demanding killers in this game who got out what you put in, to so brain dead that some of his former mains have stopped playing him, because he lost the depth that made him fun, and the less said about Trickster's rework the better. Freddy, Knight and Pyramid Head's rounds of changes were the only ones that meaningfully increased the killer's strength by actually giving them more skill expression. Knight's skill expression since his rework has shot up now that Shitterguard is gone, so while he's less effective when played by complete morons, a good Knight player can do more than they ever could before. Pyramid Head now actually has add-ons including Mega Giga Range Punishment of the Damned, which is just awesome, and Freddy jumped from being the worst killer in the game hands down to actually being pretty okay at the same time that his skill ceiling skyrocketed. Freddy went from just being an anemic clown with a shit version of purple bottles to having without a doubt the highest APM in Dead by Daylight when he's being played at maximum efficiency. Those are the kind of facelifts we should be shooting for weaker killers, and behaviour has mostly been missing the mark on that, resulting in killer changes that look good on paper and certainly feel impactful when you get into a game with them, but don't actually translate into better performances when played by and against good players. The illusion of strength is maintained, without the killer actually having the potential to be stronger. For the most part, they're just getting easier. This wouldn't inherently be a problem if the same thing was happening to Survivor. I mean, losing out on skill expression and rewarding the bare minimum is an issue in and of itself, but at least if it was happening to both sides, we'd all be in the same boat here. But for Survivor, that's not been the case so much. Granted, there has been some stuff that's reduced the skill expression needed to play Survivor, most notably making flashlight saves easier to land, but for the most part, Survivor is more challenging to play than it was last time Survivor was far and away the strongest thing in the game. And that's where we're going to be starting to talk about perks, which in my opinion are the biggest sources of disparity between the balance and perception of balance in the Survivor role. Let's look at pre-6.1.0 DBD. Survivors unquestionably ruled the roost for pretty much all of that time, and due to how stagnant the meta was back then, you tended to see mostly the same perks. Dead Hard, DS, Unbreakable, Borrowed Time, Adrenaline, maybe Spine Chill Resi if they were watching too many JRM videos, and Circle of Healing once that came out. These perks have a lot in common with each other. They were all extremely powerful, useful against every killer in the game, and were extremely easy to get value out of consistently. These were perks you regularly saw 3 or 4 to each lobby, day in and day out, and part of that was how consistent and easy they were to use. But also, most of the other Survivor perks the game had were just kinda shit compared to this stuff. Between an Exhaustion perk, because Exhaustions have always been super strong, and Borrow Time so you didn't just farm your teammates in front of the killer, you basically only had 2 perk slots if you wanted to have a strong build. And there was a massive gulf in power between the few truly exceptional perks and the bunch of garbage most Survivor perks were back then. You young'uns don't know how lucky you have it these days. Back in my day, Windows Opportunity had a 30-second cooldown after vaulting. Off the record, only hid your aura and didn't give you endurance. Babysitter used to only reveal the aura for half its duration and didn't give the Survivor any haste at all. Serve perks were atrocious back in the day. But for the past several years, you've been seeing a continuous stream of new powerful Survivor perks that occasionally go a little crazy. Dead Hard, DS, Adrenaline, and even Circle of Healing have all been nerfed, but are still solid choices. But they have so much more competition now. Do you want an altruistic healing build with the buffed up Autodidact and Solidarity? Or would you prefer it with Circle of Healing so you can run other boons with it? Do you want a self-healing build with the buffed up Resurgence and Botany Knowledge with a medkit? If you do, maybe you want to pair that with Duty of Care so you can take a hit to give the speed boost and reset yourself immediately afterwards to do it again. Maybe you prefer to recreate the Vault build of old and run Dramaturgy with Finesse. Maybe throw in a Vigil to bring that exhaustion timer down and minimise the exposed duration off Dramaturgy. For anti-tunneling, do you want to use DS or off the record to protect yourself, Shoulder the Burden or Babysitter to protect somebody else? Maybe you want both. Maybe you want to throw in Blood Rush and run 3 tunnel perks and sprint bursts for some reason. Maybe you want Deliverance since your friend can shoulder your burden now to give you a second chance at using your deli while being protected by a DS off the record off of all 4 of your hook stages. Which option do you want to punish slugging killers? Do you want Unbreakable, Wiglaf, Conviction, Foot Power Struggle, Exponential? What perks like Plot Twist made for this or Soul Guard do you want to bring to make these perks easier to use or harder to counter? Maybe you brought a friend with background player or sabotage perks to punish the killer for picking you up, so these perks become completely risk-free. Or they have reassurance, so the fact that you got hooked means nothing now. Or if all else fails, you can put on Hyperfocus, Stakeout and a BNP, power through generators at the speed of sound, and still have room for Windows and an Exhaustion perk. Survivors have a vast amount of perk diversity compared to a few years ago, and that's a wonderful thing. I am really glad behaviour has increased the pool of viable Survivor perks over time because it makes the role more replayable and interesting for both sides. But it has definitely caused some damage in the relationship between balance and the perception of balance, because when everybody ran the same few perks, everyone kind of knew what to expect in a match on both sides. But now it's kind of the Wild West, and many Survivor players don't know how to handle that. They want to try out the new healing perks or the new anti-slug build with Conviction, Soul Guard or whatever, but what happens when the killer realises that you're resetting in a split second and decides to counter it by relentlessly tunneling the shit out of you before you can get your heal off? What happens when the killer spots your teammate lollygagging around with background player last down waiting to get that window save, and starts slugging you to chase them instead, and you put on anti-tunnel instead of anti-slug? It could feel like you get punished for not bringing the right perks for the right situation because you wanted to bring something else instead, which can feel bad in the moment even if it's not strictly unfair. It's why I always take the claims of tunneling has never been worse, behaviour needs to add more basic anti-tunnel mechanics with a heavy grain of salt, because survivors have so many options now to protect themselves from tunneling or slugging or whatever other evil strategy the killers are going to use. If tunneling was that prevalent, if tunneling was that problematic, you'd be running DS or OTR or Blood Rush or something to help you out in the situations, just like we used to run Borrowed Time back in the day. But I don't see these sorts of perks anywhere near as often as I should, or as often as I hear folks complaining about the situations those perks prevent. And no, Dead Hard does not count as anti-tunnel if you can't land it. Survivors having a flatter spread of useful perks is a double-edged sword, because it means that you have a ton of powerful options, but that also means that it sucks when you pick the wrong ones and get punished for it, or when your teammates pick the wrong ones and you suffer for it. You might think it's not fun to get tunneled for bringing healing perks or slugged because your teammate's a background player, and that is fair enough. But I'd rather be in that environment than the one that killers are in. We've had to run gen control perks for as long as gen control perks have been a thing in this game. Most killers in this game don't have a hope in hell against the really good survivors like dedicating half their build to generated defense. We'd kill for the level of diversity and viable perks and builds that survivors get to have. If we have to deal with corrupt basically being tattooed into our build slots, then I'm sure that the average survivor can handle having to run off the record instead of hope or that third healing perk or something. But there is an exacerbating factor with regards to many of the strongest survivor perks in Dead by Daylight. An extra obstacle in the way of playing survivor at its optimum, and here's where I'm going to showcase that secret meta I was talking about at the start of the video. There's a tool survivors have access to now, an extra string to their bow that lets them use the strongest perks in the game to the best of their ability in ways they've never really had the chance to before. But it's a tool that many survivors will never ever use, and that tool is practice. There are several perks in this game, like Background Player, Camaraderie, Shoulder the Burden, We're Gonna Live Forever, Conviction, Last Stand, Duty of Care, and Reassurance, that are extremely powerful. They can completely change the game for survivors, and most killers have limited to 0 ways to handle them that don't leave them in a lose-lose situation. Take Background Player and Conviction, for example. Somebody goes down under a pallet and immediately starts recovering, but they have a friend in the area who's got Background Player. For the killer to be able to pressure them off of the pallet, say, they're going to have to commit a significant distance, since the survivor can easily get to the pallet with Background Player unless they're pushed far away from it. But by the time most killers can push you away from a downed survivor, they're going to be up and running with Conviction. And then you've got to worry about whether the Conviction survivor has Plot Twist, so they can negate its downside, whether that survivor has Vigil, so maybe they can outlast a broken and heal themselves. You've got to worry about Soul Guard, and even if nothing else changes, that chase has gone on for 30 seconds longer than it should have done, with nothing the killer could have done to prevent it, for the crime of getting a down. 30 seconds of extended chase time, potentially happening several times a match, is just not time that most killers have to spare. It creates a back-breaking lose-lose situation. As a result, perks like this are some of the strongest that DBD has on either side, especially when they're used together. But you don't see them very often, and see them used profitably even less often, because using these perks properly has a skill flaw in a way that survivor meta perks have never really had before. Remember those perks I covered earlier in the video? With the sole exception of Dead Hard, none of these perks required you to learn to do anything to be able to use them, and in many cases, they let you get away with stuff that you really shouldn't be able to. Catastrophic mistakes erased without consequences, without requiring skill and without anything the killer could have done to prevent it, even if they were used in solo queue without a team to help you out. That in itself is why some people think Survivor was better back in the day. They miss their meta perks being completely brain dead to use and getting you egregious amounts of value just for equipping them, without you having to do anything smart to get that value. These new meta perks don't work that way. If you put Background Player on and then play around it by just sitting on gens while your teammates go down under pallets, the perk will not do anything useful. If you put on Reassurance and only pop it when you're about to unhook a survivor anyway, it will do literally nothing at all. If you put Shoulder the Burden on and use it at the wrong moment or on the wrong person, it can literally get you killed and lose the team the match on the spot. These are powerful perks that can do extremely busted things in the right hands, like ensuring pallet side outside of a killer's audible range so they have absolutely no cues that you're waiting in the wings, even if you're injured, delay the need for an unhook by buying your team 30 seconds of free gen time, or outright switch hook stages to force killers to spread their hooks in an inconvenient way, or giving extra users of powerful hook-related perks like Deliverance and Second Wind, but using them correctly not only requires smart macro decisions and often practice with regards to timing, but also your teammates need to play around them as well. This is often, but not always, the province of a coordinated Survive with Friends team where your teammates know that you have these perks. They will go down under pallets to force free saves with background player, or free pickups with Wigglyth. They'll do gens while a teammate's hook stage is stalled by reassurance, or they'll let the fresh hook survivor unhook their death hook teammate so they can shoulder their burden. Literally, I've been running Shoulder the Burden basically every game since it came out, and I cannot count the number of times it has bailed me and my team out of difficult situations, or would have done, if the solo queue random on my team realised I had it and didn't just farm my death hook teammate before I could get there. Hell, even just holding down a decent chase or doing gens can be all you need for some of these perks to get their value, but many solo queue teammates can't even clear that low bar. Duty of Care is an extremely powerful perk, but only does anything if the survivor that you take that hit for can use that distance to extend their chase meaningfully. And you need to hold a chase too in case the killer decides that you're a better target now. And Reassurance does nothing at all if the Anon mode Sable Ward on your team uses the 30 seconds of free stalled hook stage, trying to boon a thrill totem, or angle their camera up Sable's skirt instead of doing gens. That's why Survivor is so broken but can feel so bad, because so many of those powerful perks in this game depend on good coordination, planning and practice to execute plays with them properly, and get the value that they need to out of that perk slot. There's so many barriers to using these very powerful perks. You need to use them properly, your teammates have to know that you have them and play around them properly, and you all have to be generally competent enough to do gens, heal and unhook when you should, and that's a standard of play that many survivors, and even more survivors' solo queue teammates, just can't or won't manage. It's why you see lots of Resurgence, Winner's Opportunity, Deja Vu and Life. These are perks that are not only easy to use and get value out of consistently, they actively give the survivor a helping hand in managing the game state without them having to do anything special to get it. Resurgence means that you can get away with healing under hook when you really shouldn't, or lets you heal yourself using only a small portion of a medkit if your teammate won't heal you off hook. Windows lets you plot out your chases even if your solo queue teammates have burned all the pallets that you wanted to use. Deja lets you break the Suffer Pit 3 gen that's the default Leon is dead set on giving that singularity, and Life lets you unzone yourself with what's effectively 99 sprint burst, so you can guarantee getting yourself to a playable area, even when you're doing an unsafe genning at caught off guard. A lot of survivors prefer perks that help them play the game in a more relaxed and casual way, as opposed to perks that you have to put work into using to get serious value out of, even if the value that those perks give is far in excess of what's fair. I said earlier that killers don't get buffed, they just get easier, and in the case of many powerful survivor perks, it feels like the opposite is often true. Many new survivor perks are far stronger than the perks that we normally get, but because they're harder to use and get value out of consistently than the average perk, the perception is that they're weaker than they are. But slowly but surely, that illusion is starting to fail. Every time a survivor tries out last stand background player and saves a teammate for the first time, or Conviction Exponential picks a survivor up faster than the killer's attack recovery cooldown, the dam holding back the power level of survivor develops another crack. And with the continuous buffs to already powerful survivor perks, behaviour is just pouring more and more water right into that dam. We're not just getting a stream of new high skill, high reward survivor perks, but we're also getting a constant stream of buffs to perks that are already good, and enable those high reward perks to be a little less high skill. Vigil is the perfect example here. Vigil got buffed a little while ago to increase the recovery rate status effects, like Exhausted, Exposed and Mangled, by 66%. That by itself would be a huge deal. Sprint Burst recovering in 24 seconds rather than 40 is a real game changer, but when you realise it's also given to other survivors within 16 meters of the user, and it stacks with itself, you start to realise how overloaded this perk can be. Kursia recently made a video talking about how overtuned Vigil is right now, and I can definitely recommend taking a look at that video. But it's the knock-on effects that it has in otherwise high-risk situations that I'd like to talk about here. Vigil makes many elements of survivor gameplay much safer just by existing. 24-second exhaustion timers means that all those important chase-ending exhaustion perks are much more available, which inherently means that committing to chases and getting downs quickly will be harder for most killers, meaning that challenge of your solo queue teammate holding a chase long enough to get duty of care value suddenly jumps up because catching them without their exhaustion perk available is borderline impossible now. The downsides of Shoulder the Burden and Dramaturgy, the Exposed, basically become irrelevant when there's a Vigil active. Background players' already short exhaustion duration becomes so tiny that it's practically impossible to not have it available every single time a serve gets picked up. Let's not forget that it also punishes killers for running perks that aren't hard gen control. 2 Vigils makes Friends to the End's exposed duration so short that you'll still see their aura off the perk, but the exposed will already be over. Perks like Haunted Ground, Make Your Choice, Force Hesitation, Nothing But Misery, and Knockout just aren't worth the perk slot with even 1 Vigil in play. Let's not even talk about Mangled and Hemorrhage. And that tooltip saying it doesn't affect killer powers on the wiki, that's just not accurate. Have you seen how Vigil affects Freddy's power? It's absurd, it's like his snares got surgically removed and replaced with just throwing a pillow at the survivor. You see where I'm going with this? Just passively, Vigil makes high-risk survivor play less risky and more accessible to the average player, and makes the killer's actions, choices, and perks largely irrelevant in the situations where Vigil is in play. And it's not the only perk that does this. Last Stand is a tricky perk to get value out of, but if you pair that shit with Windows, a perk you're probably running anyway, to show you the window that you need to vault, or maybe Background Player so you can get the fast vault more consistently without getting too close to the killer, suddenly the perk becomes a lot more reliable, with the only cost being that you're running other good perks that you'd probably be running anyway even if you didn't have Last Stand. Reset speeds getting quicker with the continuous buffs to healing perks like Botany, Desperate Measures, and Resurgence give survivors even more time efficiency with Reassurance, so now an entire team can easily reset without the hook time of regretting to punish their greed. Hell, Conviction procs off completing any healing action, so unhooking a survivor with Resurgence and then healing them in half a shitosecond arms that perk. And if that unhook was a Shoulder the Burden, then their Vigil can reduce your exposed duration while also giving them a second chance to use Deliverance, which Vigil also buffs, or ensuring their background player is up when you go down under a pallet to use that Conviction profitably. And their Vigil will also reduce your broken duration low enough that a friend with Botany and Do No Harm can out-heal the Conviction down now that Botany works with medkits and you've just shouldered someone's hook stage to enable Do No Harm. This is obviously an incredibly fanciful situation, but do you see what I mean here? All of these perks are strong enough to run on their own in a build and get good value out of them, value that's more than worth the perk slot. But there's so many perks like this now, that are just a little stronger than they have to be, and interact a little too well for their own good, that they wind up enabling each other even more, feeding each other like a human centipede of value and time efficiency. What's the funny bunny rabbit whose perks make the gen go boom a couple of times gonna do about all that interlocking power? Individually, the high skill perks that demand practice still require learning to get value out of them. But every time behaviour gives a numbers buff to an unsexy but powerful perk that allows survivors more margin for error, the risk inherent to those perks becomes less punishable by the killer, and the survivors get more and more wiggle room to use these powerful effects and even make mistakes doing it. This wouldn't be a problem if killer was treated similarly, if every killer had the potential to use powerful new tools to express a greater level of skill and be rewarded for it, in the same way survivors have done lately. But when it comes to the power, diversity, and design of killer perks, they've been getting the short end of the stick for years. While survivors have been getting continuous direct or indirect buffs to staple perks like exhaustions, anti-tunnel, and healing perks, alongside new options in those categories, the killer staples of gen control perks have broadly been nerfed across the board, without new options cropping up to replace them. All of the following gen control perks have been nerfed in or since patch 6.1.0 3 years ago. Corrupt Intervention, Pop Goes the Weasel, Hex Ruin, Call of Brine, Overcharge, Eruption, Pentimento, Deadlock, Pain Resonance, Deadman Switch, and Thanatophobia. Meanwhile, which ones have been buffed? Grew Embrace and Oppression. That's it. There's been no new ones either. Our last new gen control perk that wasn't completely useless dogshit like Undone was Call of Brine 3.5 years ago. And yes, I know gen perks got toned down because gen times went up to 90 seconds, but hook stages got buffed to 70 seconds and that was meant to be the compensation for that change. Survivors kind of double dipped on compensation for 90 second gens. They got longer hook stages and every gen control perk got nerfed. And let's not forget that the base kit survivor buffs like base kit BT, anti-camp and 70 second stages didn't prevent survivors from getting powerful new staple perk options and massive buffs to existing perks. Why should an extra 10 seconds of gen time that's just spent on hook anyway prevent Killer from getting that same treatment? We've had no reason to add new perks to our builds in ages, barring Weave Achievement and Ultimate Weapon that lasted all of a couple of months before being nerfed back down into mediocrity. There is perhaps no better way to understand the different situation that Killer and Survivor perks are in when you're asked to describe what a meta build for those roles looks like now and how that compares to their meta builds 3 years ago. For Survivor, the diversity of what can be called a meta build has absolutely exploded. Yes, some old meta perks like Buckle Up and Made for This have been nerfed back down into being merely okay, but for every Survivor perk that's been toned down to mediocrity, 2 or 3 new meta perks have risen in their place, and these meta perks often bring other perks up with them, because they suddenly act as synergy pieces to enable a comprehensive build, like Conviction enabling Plot Twist and Soul Guard, or Background Player enabling Last Stand. For Killer, on the other hand, the meta build has remained stagnant basically for the past 3 years. You've got your Corrupt, you've got your Pain Res, you've got your DMS, and you've either got a 4th slowdown perk, let's be honest, it's probably Pop or Grim Embrace, or if you're playing a Killer that can use it, Bamboozle or Brutal Strength. These perks are the best in the game. They have been for the past 3 years, and there's pretty much no reason to run anything else. Unless you really want to gamble and run a Hex build with the nerfed Ruin and nerfed Penty. The only things that have really changed Killer build options are the Mangled nerf that's made Sloppy almost completely useless, and the fact that Franklin's is now practically a dead perk slot now that it doesn't eat item charges anymore. The issue becomes apparent when all these slowdown perks, these staples of Killer builds that nothing has been able to replace, have all gotten worse in the past few years. Unlike Survivors, Killers haven't had anything worth replacing their old perks for in the past 3 years, barring a few months where we've achieved an Ultimate Weapon with a new hotness, and these old builds are just worse versions of what we were getting 3 years ago. Survivor meta diversity has flourished in the past few years, whereas Killers only stagnates, getting slightly worse with every chip damage nerf to Pain Res or Pentimento, and with no new options showing up to fill that void. For the past few years, but especially in the last year, the Killer role has been suffering a death by 1,000 cuts, at least at the higher levels of play. We've seen a slow and steady decay in Killer perk quality, while Survivor base kits, perks, and perk interactions only get better and better. But these powerful interactions have struggled to make themselves easily available to the average Survivor, as what many Surv players get out of the game runs counter to what these perks offer and the way they encourage you to play. At least for now. It took 2 borderline S-tier new Killer releases, followed by the most demanded Killer in DBD history, running interference most of the last year to hide the fact that Killer as a role is struggling. But now the curtain's starting to lift, and once Survivors learn that Conviction breaks every single slugging perk in the entire game, and Last Stand comes back from the kill switch dimension, it's almost certainly going to keep lifting. Many, in fact I'd almost say most Survivors, aren't feeling the benefit of much of these changes at the moment, so heavy nerfs to Survivor as a whole, or buffs to Killer as a whole, aren't going to help this. But at the same time, we can't let this trend continue, because if the lukewarm reception to Springtrap strength is any indication, B-tier Killers just aren't good enough anymore to stay competitive against the strength of modern Survivors. This isn't as simple as just buffing Killer or nerfing Survivor. Getting us out of this rut that we're so digging ourselves into will take time and effort that can't just be squeezed out in a single patch. But a good start would be looking at how you buff Killers when they get their little touch-ups every so often. If they're going to try to make a Killer stronger, their buffs should be focused on the higher levels of play, where Survivors are skilled enough to use the powerful tools in their arsenal more effectively. Most of the recent buffs to Killer have been focused on making the Killer more accessible and easier to pick up for new players, and that's created fiascos like the Clown updates. That is a philosophy that has to change, because in games with and against newer players, Killer in general is in a fine spot. It shouldn't feel like a controversial statement to say that Killers being hard to get into isn't inherently a bad thing, because it encourages skill play by giving you something to learn and master as you get better at the Killer. A great example here is Clown. Maybe instead of the changes to the haste cloud activation time that dropped his skill floor to subterranean levels, we gave pink and yellow bottles separate ammo counts that are reloaded at the same time. This means that if someone's just chungussing around, playing Clown at a basic level and spamming the same bottles over and over again, their efficiency with the bottles will not be better than it was before. But if you're a wise and studious Clown, capable of using both bottles together skillfully to get hits, you'll have a massively improved economy of bottles, effectively giving you twice as many as you were using before, and leading to way less wasted time reloading. This would be a buff to good Clown players, laser targeted at where he actually needs it. High level play where good Clowns are playing against good survivors, designed to raise what the top performing Clown players can do without lowering his skill floor and wrecking low MMR play any harder than Clown already does. There will be some killers who are more difficult to buff this way, like Legion, who have exceptionally simple kits without many moving parts that can be tuned, but in some of these cases reworks could be considered to give them a bit more depth and raise their skill ceiling so they can be stronger and more interesting on both sides. But there's only so much you can do to bring the older and weaker killers in line with the super strong stuff that modern killers get to do. And here's where we're going to have to talk about nerfs for both sides. I hope this video has managed to convince you that Survivor is pretty overtuned at the moment, and while we need to maintain a good level of perk diversity, we're getting to the point now where a few perks aren't just outliers on their own, but enable everything else too well to be allowed to continue doing it. Some of these perks I think are just overtuned. Shoulder the Burden needs a more severe downside. Vigil needs to have its numbers brought into line and probably shouldn't stack. But others like Background Player and Reassurance are more fundamentally fucked and could probably do with a rework. Exactly which perks you're looking into is very much up to you. These are ones I would definitely consider toning down. But I think a good rule of thumb here might be if the only defense you can lodge for this perk's existence is that it's only good in a coordinated team, then we're not losing much by having the perk nerfed or reworked. A coordinated team can use literally every perk in the game. They're not going to be too inconvenienced by a Background Player being taken out back to see the rabbits. It would also be nice to see behaviour add a wider variety of staple killer perks rather than just kicking the can around going, I guess we could nerf Franklin's. Decent slowdowns, dependable info perks that anyone can use, utility perks that broadly fill enough functions you can bring them in a wide variety of builds and on a wide variety of killers. Overwhelming Presence is a great example of that after the recent change. Survivors get the luxury of perks that synergize well with other perks and items while still being useful enough to run on their own, and killers should have that too. The fact that Human Greed might be the best new killer perk of Year 9 should really say everything here. But there also needs to be a level of awareness as to how strong the very best killers in this game are, because a big reason why servers get away with so much stuff is because very few strong killers exist who are far too easy to play for the level of value they get. Billy, Blight, Kaneki, Singularity, and to a lesser extent Dracula. These are killers who get far too much reward for not enough effort. A disproportionate reward compared to every other killer in the game, and the fact that so many killers get to do so much for so little means that these broken Survivor perk combos get a pass way more than they should. Normalising the power level between survivors, weak killers and strong killers goes both ways. A lot of weak killers need some love, but also a fair few strong killers need to be made weaker or at least made significantly harder to pick up and play. Equipping Brutal on Blight or Bamboozle on Kaneki, and then playing like you've got a piece of metal embedded in your skull, is as effective or more effective than playing most B tier or lower killers with actual practice and skill, and that's not a state that should be allowed to continue. Both the benefit of Survivor players who don't want their 10th Kaneki of the day, and killer players to encourage them to actually get good at the killers they enjoy if they want good results. For the entire history of this channel, I don't think I've played less killer than I have in the past year or so. That's what happens when your favourite killer is nerfed into the core of the earth, when the new killers that come out don't really interest you for the most part, and when killer queues get so long you can only measure them with a sundial. It's so fatiguing to realise that a lot of the older killers just can't keep up anymore, unless you're relying on survivors playing like total dog shit, and it limits the designs of future killers if they're going to need to be as strong as Dracula or Kaneki to not get overwhelmed by the options that servers have at high level play. I am all for survivors having access to a wide variety of powerful and skill expressive perks, but killers should not have to hope that the survivors are too bad to use them to have fun playing any killer below the middle of A tier. Truth be told, I don't know if behaviour sees this the way I do. If they think killer as a whole is okay, or if the way they've been balancing killers as of late has been effective. But I guess we'll find out in the next major update. And if anyone from Behaviour is watching this, good luck to you. You've got a hell of a mess to unravel in time for the next chapter. But while we're here, any chance for a merchant buff? It's not too much trouble. I mean, she's been dog shit for almost a year now, and other killers have received multiple rounds of buff since then, so, you know, it'd be nice. Hi everyone, I wanted to give a quick update on sort of channel stuff before ending this video. First things first, I do want to apologise this video took so long and that I've had a pretty upload light August for the most part. Obviously DBD has not been in the best spot this month, and yeah, that hit my motivation pretty hard, but rather more pressingly, I got the nasty news that my gran died earlier in the month, and that has damaged my ability to focus on making videos quite significantly. But I think it's all out of my system now. The funeral was almost a week ago now, and I feel like I'm very much kind of back in action after that. Also, this video is bloody massive, so getting through it also took a fair bit of time. But yeah, it is very much full steam ahead for the rest of the month and into September, and it couldn't come at a better time because at the end of the month is my channel's 5th anniversary. My first video upload was on the 30th of August 2020. And with that deadline coming up pretty rapidly, I've got something very exciting in the pipeline for you. Anyone who follows me on Twitter will already have seen me posting about it, and anyone who pays attention to my community posts will have seen it as well, but I'm working on something really cool at the moment. I am doing my first ever original chapter concept. It is called Blood in the Mire. It is going to be a sequel chapter to an existing killer already in the game, kind of like how Cursed Legacy was that to Spirit. And as to who it is and what that will entail, I'll leave that up to you guys to guess. And that'll be coming at the end of August on the 30th as a celebration for my channel's 5th birthday. Also, I'm looking to get a new webcam soon, and when I get that, we're back to streaming as well. Hopefully that'll be the same regular thing. And of course, we have the original chapter coming out early in September as well. So I've very much got a lot on my plate, and I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into it. So yeah, that really is all there is to it. I just wanted to give a bit of a catch up on how slow things have been this August and how I'm kind of, getting back on the horse, if you will. My patrons have already seen assets and stories and stuff that I've already had made for this chapter because it's been in the process for ages. If you're interested in taking a look, then my Patreon link is down in the description. Do go take a look at that if you're at all interested. They also get a day's access to my videos, they've seen this bit already, and if not, then I guess I'll see you at the end of August for Blood in the Mire. I hope you're ready. Cheerio.